I always have fun trying to make I have tiny ears, so it's really hard to make these things stick. Okay. There we go. Okay. So good morning, and thank you for coming. I know that my friends who are pastors at Christian churches always look forward to Easter because they get to see members of their congregation they have not seen in some time. But at a Buddhist center, I guess we're not going to have that same experience of having folks show up on Easter who are not here at other times of the year. But whatever brings you here today, thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. And thank you for bringing your goodness and sincerity to this place. Because that's what it's here for. The place is here for us to bring our goodness to this place, our intention to meditate to this place. And by coming to this place and meditating in this space, we enrich this space with our sincerity and our goodness. And so if you come into this room and you say, hey, room feels pretty good. Room feels pretty good. I've got some good news for you. You helped make it that way by bringing your goodness into this space and your aspirations into this space. So I just, I'm always filled with gratitude when I look into the doorway and see folks sitting in this room because they're bringing that goodness here. So thank you for that. So originally I had another idea in mind for this talk. In fact, I prepared it. And then while I was driving in this morning, I realized it was Easter. And, you do kind of forget after a while. And so I realized maybe I should talk about Jesus today. That would be a real surprise for the people coming for a Buddhist talk, wouldn't it? So I'm going to talk on the topic of Christ and Buddha as brothers, and then we'll have a discussion. I'll give a little bit of a rundown of what I know on the subject, and then if there's a discussion on it, we'll do it. And if there's no discussion, then we'll meditate and talk about something else. But I thought it would be a good place to start. Because I am on the evil that is social media, the vast wasteland of social media, I see lots of memes. And one of my favorite memes, I have to confess, is the Jesus and Buddha as brothers meme that I see frequently, where I've seen a meme where they're hugging each other, and I've seen memes where they are both depicted as stained glass windows, implying the connection. And they're all coming from a place of recognition. When you meet somebody you feel like simpatico with, when you feel some kinship with another human being, or an animal for that matter, there's, when we feel this sort of kinship, we immediately gravitate to such people. And we see ourselves in them, and maybe they see themselves in us, and we feel this bond. And I think that people in this country, many of whom grew up in one of the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Islam, or Christianity, do feel something of a kinship with spiritual people of all kinds, and also with Buddhists. And so I'd like to say a couple words about this. It goes back to two questions I frequently get in the frequently asked questions of a Lama. I should write an article sometime about that. Lamas frequently asked questions, Western Lamas especially. We get more questions than the Tibetan Lamas get because I think we look a little more approachable. I don't know. But the idea is, one of the most frequently asked questions is, what did the Buddha have to say about Jesus? That's one question. The other question is, do Buddhists believe in God? And so I'm going to discuss these two questions. So the first the first one, I think, is the easiest one to deal with is, do Buddhists believe in God? And my teacher, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, the founder of this center, was asked this question once. And he gave what I would call a lawyer's answer. No disrespect to lawyers, but he gave a lawyer's answer. He said, well, it depends how you define God. And he said, if you believe that God is a person with a personality who has likes and dislikes and lives somewhere, he said, no, we don't believe in that. However, he said, if you believe that God is the inexpressible nature of all things, then yeah, I would say we believe in that. So that is really interesting to me, that we don't believe, he said, Buddhists don't believe in a person called God who has a personality and who has likes and dislikes and lives in a heaven or some other realm somewhere. We don't believe in that, but we do believe that the highest truth is the nature of all things, which to really talk about that, we would have to go into a discussion of what is meant by the word Dharmakaya, which would get me into a whole lot of trouble. But basically the Buddha said that all of us have a mind, and that because we have a mind, that mind can get to know itself. That mind can actually know not just facts, not just experiences and perceptions, that the mind can actually know itself, and know itself so completely that it transforms our experience of ourselves. And this is called the awakened mind, or Dharmakaya. The Buddha mind that is awakened is called Dharmakaya. They call it the Dharma body of the Buddha, if you want to get all technical. But the idea is that the nature of our mind is awakening. The nature of our mind is Buddhahood. And that is actually the nature of all things. But some assembly is required for this particular, some assembly is required. We have to assemble the pieces to both experience our own awakened nature and experience the awakened nature of all things. It's we have to put a few things together first. We don't wake up in the morning knowing it. We have to come to understand it and come to believe in it and come to work on it, little by little by little. For most of us, that knowledge begins with quiet sitting meditation, where we experience our minds in a different way than we have ever experienced our minds before. My teacher, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, said, look, he said, Americans don't grow up knowing the teachings of the Buddha. Let's face it. The majority of people who live in America do not grow up knowing the teachings of Buddha. And so when they first encounter the teachings of Buddha, they might kind of go, I'm not sure about that. I don't know if I believe that. I don't know if I believe that I have Buddha nature. I'm not sure I believe that I can become a Buddha too. Like maybe he was special or something and I'm not. But he said they may not instantly take to these teachings. He said, if they meditate, he said, if they actually practice even one session of meditation, he said they will experience their mind in a different way than they have experienced it before, and that will give them confidence in themselves and their ability to learn about the teachings of the Buddha, and it will give them confidence in the teachings of the Buddha itself, which I've found to be true over and over again. Because how do we experience our mind every day? Chatter, 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 talk, talk, talk. But when we sit and we allow our attention to settle a little bit, we come to see that there's more to us than our thoughts, then our feelings, then our emotions. There's more, there's something deeper and something profounder about us than just the thoughts. And this is, I think, what my teacher was referring to when he said if they sit, they'll have confidence in themselves and in the teachings and want to learn about the teachings of the Buddha. So all of this is a little discussion of the question, do Buddhists believe in God? Well, we believe in awakened mind, which is the nature of all things. So yeah, I guess we sort of do. However, this does not rule out people who believe in that other definition of God. It doesn't exclude people who think that there was a creator of this world and that we have a relationship with that creator. It doesn't rule that out. See, this is why I think Buddhism is so interesting. It's because the Buddha had his teachings, but he took a live and let live attitude toward other belief systems. And my teacher exemplified this, and I tell this story frequently as an illustration of it, so pardon me if this is a repeat for some of you. But there was an older woman who came to Khenpo Rinpoche once saying, look, I was raised a Christian, and I love Jesus, and I love God, and I love going to church. If I want to practice Buddhist meditation and learn Buddhist teachings and practice them, do I have to give up going to church? And Rinpoche's answer was, again, incredibly skillful. He said, when you get a new friend, you don't get rid of your old friends. You don't get rid of your old friends. Now you have two friends. When you get a new friend, you don't get rid of your old friends. Now you have two. He said, so there is no inconsistency with you continuing your friendship with Jesus and God. There's nothing that stands in the way of that. And she said, the woman said, I'm so relieved. I'm so happy. She said, but you know, I'm probably not going to ask my Christian pastor the same question. She had a sense that there might be a different answer, I guess, So this means that a person could feasibly be a Christian and a Buddhist at the same time, feasibly, from the Buddhist side of things. And I actually know several people who are like this, and they find and derive great benefit from both of their traditions. And so that was, and I just realized I've started the whole program without doing the prayer. We'll just set aside in our mind the thought that we are beginning this session with the benefit of all sentient beings in mind. So we'll do a little mental refuge taking. So that's the first of the two commonly asked questions. Do Buddhists believe in God? Now the other one was, what did the Buddha have to say about Jesus? Now here we have a bit of a problem. And most people who don't know the history of Buddhism and don't know the history of Christianity don't know that there's a problem. They're completely unaware because they know neither the history of Buddhism nor the history of Christianity, except that there's one big hint to the history of Christianity, and that's what year it is. We're in the year 2024, which in the old days they would have called the year of our Lord, because Christians set the calendar up and they choose the first year as being the year of Christ's existence in the world. So that's like roughly 2,000 years, roughly 2,000 years. But of course that means that there's a whole bunch of history that didn't have anything to do with that, but we're just going to forget about that for the moment. But we can't forget it too far, because the Buddha was born about 500 years before Christ, in the before Christ, the BC era. And so the Buddha had nothing whatsoever to do with Jesus. He did not know about Jesus because the teachings of Christianity were not active at that time when he was born and practicing Hinduism in his own home country of India. He was unaware of Christ at that time in terms of history. So there's Buddha could not have said anything about Jesus. So that was not happening. However, there, of course, are lots of theories being floated, without evidence, unfortunately. Somebody I was talking with earlier this morning, we were talking about it being circumstantial evidence. I may not have been you, but there was somebody else I was talking to about it, and they were saying that there's a little circumstantial evidence about Jesus knowing of Buddhism. And there were stories, there have been stories, and I won't necessarily call them conspiracy theories, because where's the conspiracy? But the idea, there are popular theories that Jesus, who is not mentioned in the Bible for a certain number of years, that he went to India and studied Buddhism and then came back to the Holy Land and began to preach. This is, again, it's circumstantial evidence at best, and I just don't know that it happened. I wasn't there, and just so there's no way I could know about that. But I'm sure there were lots of cross influences that came about because of trade between all of the different countries of the world at that time. It's possible. Let's put it this way, it's possible that there was some understanding and cross-understanding. So the answer to the second frequently asked question, what did Buddha have to say about Christ? And the answer of that is nothing. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a third possibility, which is that their teachings are close to one another, and that's what I'd like to talk about next. Is there's certain resonances between their teachings that are interesting. And I'm going to say that the reason for this is because the teachings they gave are based in what it means to be a human being. What does it mean to be a human being in this world? What does it take to be a human being in this world? How can a person be a basically decent, kind, loving human being in this world? And both of them taught nonviolence. Both of them taught loving all beings. Both of them taught deep connection with what we perceive of as being the divine, and helping others, and reaching out to and helping others. So in that way, their teachings are very similar. And so there is this resonance. There is this resonance between the two of them. And that resonance is a good thing. It's a good thing, because it helps both faith traditions feel a kinship to each other. They share a similar value system. But then we also have to remember there are different kinds of Buddhists and different kinds of Christians. There are some Christians who practice a religion about Jesus, about who he was and what his significance is in world history. And there are also people who practice the religion of Jesus, which is the religion that he spoke of in his words that are quoted time and time again in the Bible. I'm reminded was it Thomas Jefferson who created the Red Letter Bible? Any history nuts in here? Anyway, I believe it was Thomas Jefferson who created what became known as the Red Letter Bible. He went into the Bible and asked the printer to print in red ink the actual words of Christ. Anytime there's a direct quote that's directly attributed to Jesus, it would be placed in red print. Because if you look at all the rest of the Bible as being commentary, those are the actual teachings of Christ that are in those red letters. And I think about, they actually talk about, there is a discussion about red letter Christians, who are people who practice mainly the religion of Jesus, as opposed to the religion about who he was and what their relationship to him needs to be. So it's just, anyhow, it's a bit of historical trivia, but it's interesting because the teachings of Jesus and the teachings of Buddha bear some resemblance to one another. And in fact, in the modern day, Christians and Buddhists have had a number of dialogues. And of course, there are some high-profile dialogues that have happened in history. Those of you who are older like me will remember the writings of the Christian mystic Thomas Merton, who died in the later part of the 20th century. But before his death, he had met His Holiness the Dalai Lama of Tibet. He had gone to Asia. He had written a journal about his interconversations, his conversations with Buddhists and so on, and so forth. And the Dalai Lama was quoted as saying one time that if he had lived, had he not died accidentally on his way back from one of his Asia trips, if he had not died, he would be a valuable person for Christian-Buddhist dialogue into the later part of the 20th century. He would have helped a lot of people not have fear of Buddhism and have a more positive viewpoint of it. And there's a story that's told about when Thomas Merton went to a Tibetan Lama for meditation instruction. And the Lama said, well, to begin your training as a Buddhist meditator, first you have to accept the idea of past and future lives. And Father Merton was said to have replied, well, I can't do that. I'm a Catholic. I don't believe in past and future lives like that. No, I don't. And the Lama said, no problem. Just pretend that you do. Just pretend that you believe in past and future life. Just pretend that you do. That was sufficient, and then he gave him his teaching and training in Buddhist meditation. So there's a lot of I guess, shall we say, latitude in the Buddhist teachings about these things. So if we look at the teachings of Christ, the idea, blessed are the peacemakers, and the Buddha taught that violence is not justified, and that we should do our best not to harm other beings or harm ourselves. And if we look at the teachings to love one another that Christ gave, well, Buddha said that all beings should be treated as though they are our parents, because in one of those past lives they probably were, and so forth and so on. And that the Christ said the kingdom of God is within you. And Buddha said that Buddha nature is within all beings. So the idea is that these teachings taken together show a kinship that is I guess you could say, mind-opening. It offers us some idea that even though they never met, that they bear some resemblance to one another. And so what does this tell us as people who might have come from Christianity, people who might have come from a Christian background? That's another question that I get because I was a Christian when I was a child. And I remember going to the University of Dayton to give a talk and being confronted about it as the very first question after I addressed a religion class by somebody said, well, how do you square being a Buddhist and your rejection of Catholicism? And I said, wait a minute. I said nowhere in my talk that I rejected Christianity. I did not say that. And they said, well, you're not a practicing Catholic now. I said, that doesn't mean rejection. I said, look at it this way. It's just that it's not relevant to me right now. It's not what I'm doing right now. But that doesn't mean that I've rejected. I never thought of it that way. I never thought that my becoming a Buddhist was a protest vote or something against Christianity. I never thought of it as a radical act of rebellion against Christianity. I just never felt like that. Now, to be fair, I have met people for whom that is true. And as a matter of fact, this is why when teenagers come to me and say, "Can I become Buddhist?" I say, "I'm really sorry, but we got to talk to your family first. We have to talk to your guardians first. You're underage, and I think it's not wise for me to get in the middle of a family argument." And actually, one teen did confess to me that they were just becoming Buddhist to make their parents angry. It actually happened. So I have to be careful. I have to be careful in how I apply my teachings and how I work with students. So, in other words, we have this life that we are in right now, and we have all of these influences from our background. And someone said, so the other question that God asked was, well, aren't you worried as a Christian who became Buddhist, aren't you worried about hell? And I said, it crossed my mind. Yeah, it crossed my mind. I said, but I had a conversation with God one time. I was driving my car, Interstate 270, just that place where it makes the bend going east. You've just come from the north end of town, which is where the KTC was located at one time. We were in Linworth at someone's home. And I was driving my car home, going to get off on 161 to head back to Newark. It's just right about that bend. I said, God, we got to have a talk here. We have to talk. And I said, I know what all of the Christian people say and this kind of stuff. I said, but I gotta believe that you're kind of an okay guy. If you're kind of our spiritual father, you're kind of a cool dad, as opposed to stern dad. And so I'm going to count on the fact that you understand that I need to do this, and I need to do it for my sanity. I need to do it for my heart. I need to do it for my soul, if you want to go that far. I got to do this. And if that's bad, I accept that. Don't like it, but I accept that because I think that you are not the person you are said to be. And so I'm counting on that because I have to do this. I cannot not do this. I can't not do this. I have to do this. So that's how I squared it in my own mind. It was not a rejection. It was, I got to do this. I just have to do this. And that was my own personal process. It may not be your process. And everybody who grew up with that teaching will have to have a process. And so this is just one way that one person worked through it. And even among Christians, there is disagreement about hell. There are Christians who believe that there really isn't any hell, and that God is very merciful and is kind and helps all beings. So I'm counting on that one. So I see from the time that I did run out of material before I ran out of I did run out of material before I ran out of time. But I want to say one more thing about the whole idea of the Christian teachings and the Buddhist teachings and dialogue between the two. And that is that we do have a lot to say to one another. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama himself was asked to comment on the Gospels of Jesus. And if you would like to read his teachings, he gave his own commentaries on the words of Jesus. He was asked to do it by a Christian Buddhist dialogue group. a group of Christians asked him to make comments, and he did so. And the book that was based on that is called The Good Heart. The Good Heart. And it's the Dalai Lama's comments on the Gospels of Jesus. So I think that's worth reading. And then there actually is a book called Jesus and Buddha as Brothers that was written by the Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh. And I think he actually wrote another book called Living Buddha, Living Christ, which is also another interesting take on the relationship between these two major world faiths. But in the end, my hope is that by talking about this today on Easter, that we will do our best to show respect in whatever way we can for all of the faith traditions of the world. Because even though we might make light of some of the teachings, they make light of ours as well, you know. Even Buddhists have disagreements with other Buddhists about their belief systems. And but if we can at least have a conversation with each other where we show each other some basic respect, this is good. I will always remember when I took refuge and became a Buddhist. It's a ceremony in which the Lama, who is giving their vow of refuge, represents the Buddha for the purposes of the ceremony. And the student comes before the teacher, who represents the Buddha, and asks to receive the vow of refuge, meaning that they take the Buddha as their teacher. They take the Buddha's teachings, the Dharma, as their path, and they take the Buddhist community or Sangha as their community. And that this becomes, in the language of recovery, it becomes their higher power, these three jewels of refuge, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. They take these three as their trustworthy sources of inspiration. Let's see if we Hello, hello. Okay, that did it. I think we're good. Yeah, all right. Yeah, okay, thanks. Thank you. Okay, that's good. I love samsara. It's like everything is impermanent and interdependent. More proof. So the teaching of the, let's see, now I have to figure out where I left off. I'm having too much fun. Can't remember. Three, yes. The three sources of refuge. Thank you. So when my teacher gave this vow, when he would give this vow, and people took the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha as their refuge, he would always give little teachings about how to relate to the three jewels after one has taken refuge. And you know, he said you should renew your refuge vow. I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. You should do it morning and evening so you kind of remember who you are. It's kind of like you use those as signposts in your day, or shall we call them bookends on your day, where you remind yourself that you are a child of the Buddha, so to speak, and he's your teacher. And so then he gave the list of things that you should and shouldn't do now that you're Buddhist. For example, now that you are Buddhist, you should do your best to remember the three jewels of refuge as often as you can. The second thing is that having taken the Buddha as your teacher, so the first thing is that you should remember the Buddha. Second thing is taking the Dharma as your path. You should always do your best not to harm other beings, because that's the spirit of all the teachings of Buddha. And then the Sangha, one should do one's best to associate with people who are healthy, spiritually healthy for you, where you can. And so one of the things that he also said was that you need to show respect. First, having taken refuge in the Buddha, you show respect for images of the Buddha, whether you like them or don't like them, whether they're pretty or ugly, whether they're big or small. And he said, always think of them as being representative of your Buddha nature. Second, having taken refuge in the Dharma, you should always show respect to books of the Dharma, not put them on the floor, not sit on them, that kind of thing. And then finally, having taken refuge in the Sangha, you should show respect to your Dharma brothers and sisters. But what was interesting was he also said for each of those three instructions of respect, he said you should also show respect to the religious icons of other faiths. You should also show respect to the holy books of other faiths. And you should always show respect to the followers of other faiths, not saying, I am a Buddhist and I am superior to you. He said, don't be like that. And he said, and don't criticize them. He said, because it's unseemly. I love English, unseemly. Does anybody use that word? Well, his translator did. And it was amazing, So that really makes me happy, because he was all about respect. He said, even if you don't agree with the teachings of these other faiths, you don't criticize them. It's not your business. Anyway, so I wanted to make sure I included that, because these were things he said. And I found his words to always be wise and helpful. They've got me out of trouble more times than I can count. So I think we'll stop here for the presentation. But if you would like to ask questions or start a discussion, either on this topic or another topic, you can join us at one of our question microphones, and we can talk for about 10 minutes or so about these things.
Thanks for getting us going on Easter.
Hey, yeah, I'm happy to be here.
50 years ago, I was in Srinagar, Kashmir, northwest India, and came across the tomb of Christ. They'd built a building over it and turned it into a little bit of a museum. So I bought a couple books and visited. So the theory being that Christ did not die on the cross, that he went to that cave and got rehabilitated by his followers and snuck out of the area and taken to India. So that kind of parallels the story of where he was between the ages of 18 and age 30. Also, that he had gone to India and studied with the Buddhist masters. So that's a little bit of evidence.
There you go. There you go.
The other thing I'd like to mention is you talked about what is God, and I think of God as the process by which we make the world. The opening lines in the Dharmapada.
Yeah, exactly.
People have, over the ages, have seen the magic of the world manifesting and have attributed it to some being, but it's really us that's going through this process that's making the world.
I really appreciate you sharing that, and I appreciate knowing that there's a tomb of Christ. It's there. Years ago. Okay, don't know what. Yeah, that's. Anybody else been to Srinagar? Okay, and I've been Srinagar adjacent. I was Kashmir adjacent when I was in Himachal Pradesh. But anyway, I'd like to say one thing about that, and that is that. The second thing you mentioned, about Christ, and I feel like we we all have this capacity to know things and to create the world. And just for folks who may or may not have heard the opening words, I'll recite them because these are one of the only like teachings of the Buddha that I've memorized. You know, it's just the opening words of Thomas Byram's interpretation of the Dhammapada, the sayings of the Buddha. He said, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts, and with our thoughts we make the world. If we think, speak, and act with an impure mind, suffering follows us, just as surely does the wheel follows the ox that draws the cart." Then he repeats it again because it's from the sutras and they repeat a lot. We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts, and with our thoughts we make the world. If we think, speak, and act with a pure mind, meaning an unselfish mind, happiness will follow us like a shadow that's unshakable. And then he goes on to talk about, he says, hate never once dispelled hate. Only love dispels hate. This is the law, ancient and inexhaustible. Then he completes the section by saying, you too shall pass away. Knowing this, how can you quarrel? Anyway, so it's fun. You can check out that translation, it's still my favorite. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that. Yes.
Hello, welcome back.
Yeah,
Lama
thank
Kathy.
you. It's good to be here.
The Buddhist scholar Bob Thurman, who's written tons and was a scholar for many years, is still alive and teaching. Anyway, I've noticed he's become very comfortable using the word soul. And I think he does that because it's just a shorthand that more people are familiar with, rather than trying to describe like mind stream or some other Buddhist concepts.
Right.
But anyway, it sort of reminded me when you're talking about, well, if you believe God is this, then no. And if you believe God is this, then yes. With soul, I wonder if you can make the same sort of, parse it in the same way to say, well, if you believe the soul is this permanent thing that never changes and lasts forever, then no, Buddhists do not believe in that. But if you believe or a soul is, I don't know what the other version of that would be.
Somebody else used the term process. We are process.
Right, yeah. I guess I don't have a question. I just wanted to mention it and see if you had any thoughts about it.
You know, I really do appreciate you bringing this because I do think that it is very difficult to accept the notion of being a process rather than an entity. And I think because our experiences, our perceptions, our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, they're so powerful for us that it's hard to not take things personally, and in so doing, to believe that there is someone that it's happening to. But if we look at the teachings, and my favorite new toy, my favorite new explanation of this is in Tralik Rinpoche's book on karma. The book Karma, what it is, what it isn't, and why it matters. He talks about the lack of entity in our being. But the evidence is overwhelming to us that we are an entity. But he said it really, if you go deeply into the teachings of the Buddha, we're just a set of processes. And I was just talking to the Dharma group in Athens. And it's like, hi, Athens KTC, if you're watching, I had a fun time with you today. I did a Zoom teaching for them earlier today. And I used the example of an old neon sign. You remember those old neon signs where it's just a series of triangles? And they are illuminated one at a time. And when they're illuminated one at a time, they give the illusion of movement, like that there's an arrow actually moving. But it's more like that. That's how we are. We are this iteration of ourselves and then a few seconds, and then a second later, we're that iteration of ourselves, and that iteration, and that iteration, and that iteration. And we're continuously, it's, you know, it's being saved somewhere. You know, these iterations are being held together by our habitual thoughts. And so this is why the Tibetans say that it's good for us to take the refuge vow and think of ourselves as Buddhist, and it's good to take the bodhisattva vow and think of ourselves as bodhisattvas in training, because those kinds of thoughts are now the container for all of these, for this process. And so as this process continues, we change every moment, so that like and the Buddha didn't call us an entity, because that was what was popular among Hindus, was thinking that we had a soul created by God, and that soul would go through a series of experiences and then return to God when it was in a perfected state. But the Buddha said that's not how he experienced his mind. He experienced his mind as process that was continuously changing. So we do have the sense of entity. So what the Buddha did was he gave that entity a new identifier. First, we would be called a follower of the Buddha. That's a new identifier. And then our next new identifier is that we're a bodhisattva in training until we become a Buddha, when labels don't matter anymore. So I think it's really clever of him to both say that entity wasn't happening, but then to do everything to give us a positive entity. Isn't that? So this is just me talking, but.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, yes, please. It's good discussion, guys.
Hi, Lama Kathy.
Hey, hi.
Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you fine, thank
Okay.
you.
I had a question generally about faith. So when it comes to the way that certain people express their faith, some people can use it in a sort of distorted way where they're not going by the spirit of the faith, they're going by their own interpretation. That can sometimes cause harm. If that were to happen, and you know, it's kind of like riding the knife's edge, where we're not trying to criticize them for their faith, but to not cause harm to others, to prevent people from having harm done to them. You know, it's a difficult situation. I didn't know if you had any questions or thoughts about it.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked about this, because this is something that I've seen in Buddhists as well as in non-Buddhists. The tendency to identify so strongly with belief that it becomes a badge of honor and a cause for one to feel superior to someone else, to feel a secret sense of self-superiority over others because of one's beliefs. And I think that everybody does this at some point in their faith journey, is they feel, well, I'm superior because I'm a this, or I'm superior because I'm a that. But the superiority is where the poison is for us. It's the danger for us, is where we think we're superior, because then if we feel like we're superior to someone, we won't think twice about harming them. Because after all, we're more important than they are. I mean, it's kind of an ugly way to think of oneself, but it can happen. We can fall into it. Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, the master of the late 20th century, he called it spiritual materialism. You know, that by clinging to this idea of being superior to others, we're actually damaging our own psyche, if for lack of a better word. We're damaging ourselves and creating a false narrative for our life, and possibly putting ourselves in a position to harm other beings. So that can happen. And the other thing, so that's one thing I just wanted to note, was that it's important for us to watch our mind. There's everybody who knows me knows that I'm kind of keen on a couple of books. I'm really keen on the book, The Great Path of Awakening by Jamgon Khantrul the Great, which is an explanation of love and compassion meditation. But I'm also super keen on a book that was written around the same time, The 37 Practices of a Bodhisattva. I gotta grab my copy here. Here it is. It's in kind of bad shape. But anyway, long story about this, but the short version is a great master of the late 20th century said, if you want to learn about compassion, read this book 1,000 times. I'm working on it. I'm only up to 300, but 36 comes to mind. In brief, it says, number 36, in brief, whatever conduct one engages in, one should ask, what is the state of my mind? What am I thinking? What am I thinking? Accomplishing others' purpose through constantly maintaining mindfulness and awareness of one's own state of mind is the Bodhisattva's practice. So we have to be so aware. I talked to a friend and he said, being a Buddhist is hard. I said, why? He said, you gotta know what you're thinking all the time. And not only do you have to know what you're thinking all the time, you have to actually take responsibility for stuff you're thinking. Not just the stuff that pops up, because there's going to be weird stuff that pops up in your mind. I mean, it just pops up, right? But what do you do with it afterwards? Do you look at that and say, go away? Or do you say, let's sit down and chat? And so we don't necessarily have a choice over the stuff that just pops up, but the stuff we actually say, yeah, what about you? Then we have to take responsibility for that. So he said, it's really hard being a Buddhist because you got to take responsibility. Yikes. Anyhow, sorry, that tangent, but not really. But I feel like that's important to note, that we need to watch our mind and then see when we are in the wrong and accept that and say, that's me, that's me being me feeling superior to you and this sort of thing. So then the other thing that I think of when you say this is a talk, and we don't really have enough time to go through the whole story, but I was asked to give a talk to a group of Christian seminarians, and I was asked, what do you want the the Christian leaders of tomorrow to know about your faith? And to cut to the chase, I basically talked about an incident at a chaplaincy class that I was talking to, where a Christian pastor who was training to be a chaplain said that he would go into the hospital room of a seriously ill patient who was not Christian and try to convert them, make them accept Jesus from their hospital bed. And when I told this story, all the seminarians, they gasped. And I said, well, there's a reason that you're horrified by this. And it's because the person who said it, you have doubts about that person's approach. You have doubts. You think maybe they feel superior to someone else, and that by saying that they would try to spiritually overpower a sick person into accepting their religion, that's just not right. Nobody should do that. It's unfair. It's wrong. Why? I said, because we can't allow ourselves to use our religious beliefs as a cover for our bad behavior. Maybe we have a thing about wanting to overpower people. Maybe we feel powerless because of stuff that happened to us. But we might want to overthrow a person we're arguing with, and so we'll use dirty tactics and try to make them feel guilty or do this or do that. And we are hiding our aggression. We're hiding our aggression under religious belief, and we have to not do that. And so I said, what do I want the Christian leaders of tomorrow to know about my faith? We're fine. We are not the field of your evangelism. We understand you have to talk about God. We understand you have to talk about Christ. We get that because it's part of the great, the great charge that Christ gave everybody, go teach all nations and all that jazz. But I just need you to understand we're fine. So if we ask for a timeout on your evangelism, don't be mad at us. Because we're fine. We're actually fine. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate you bringing that. We've got time for one more, and I think we have one more here. No, yeah, right here? Yeah. This will be the last question today. Hey, good morning.
Good morning, Lama Kathy.
Good morning.
I have a kind of question that kind of popped up. So Buddha, of course, gave a lot of good advice and things, but how was he able to come up with these wisdom? Is it from his meditation, or how did he?
I think I understand your question. Let me see if I can repeat it back to you, because I want to make sure I understand it. So is your question, where did the Buddha's wisdom and his advice stem from?
Yes.
Okay, got it. Okay. And I would say that what my teacher told me, and I think it's true, is that the Buddha, the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni, his enlightenment experience gave him an omniscient view of his entire life, all of his previous lives, and so forth and so on. He had a vast view of human nature, not just his own nature, but human nature, and that he was skillful in expressing that. So I think that his wisdom came from two things. His enlightenment experience gave him deep, profound understanding into human nature and why we do the things we do and how we get confused, right? And if he understood how we confuse ourselves, he could also explain to us how to become unconfused. And then his capacity for knowing humanity to the point where he would know what things we are hiding from ourselves and be able to point those out and show us the truth of how we are and how we think. I think that comes from his skill and being able to express and be able to adjust circumstances to learn something. I'll use one experience from the sutras, one story from the sutra. My teacher told this story. He said one of the Buddha's disciples had an intellectual deficit. He couldn't understand the teachings. But the Buddha wanted to help him. So he said, look, you take care of the temple every day, right? And the man said, yes, I'm in charge of sweeping the temple. And he said, well, that's great. So he said, think that as you are sweeping the temple, that you are sweeping away the obstacles and obscurations of yourself and all beings. And he said, okay, I can do that. And so I don't know how long it took, but after sweeping away all of these obstacles and obscurations over and over and over again, the man, even though he had an intellectual deficit, was able to see his Buddha nature and experience awakening. So the Buddha was very clever in how he could help other beings discover and live their Buddha nature. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, the Buddha was rare and amazing in his ability to speak to anybody. There's a wonderful book that was written about another incident from the life of the Buddha. And it was written kind of as like it's not a thriller, but I mean, it was written from an interesting point of view. It was about the Buddha and the serial killer. Yeah, there was a serial killer on the loose at that time. And he was known as Angulimala because he had been told by a shaman that if he killed 1,000 people, he would gain power over everything in the world. And that he needed to take one of the fingers from each of his victims and wear it as a necklace. And that, I know, gross, right? And so the Buddha was actually able to, and oh, by the way, and he had killed 999 people, and then he met the Buddha. So, this may or may not be the accurate telling of the story, but so the story goes that the Buddha was able to overcome this man's ignorance, and he became a follower of the Buddha. He not only didn't kill the Buddha, he became a follower and then became an awakened being himself. So the Buddha was pretty skilled. There was only one person he couldn't help. I was told, and this was Bokhar Rinpoche. He came to speak to us in retreat. He said there was only one person the Buddha could not help, and that was his cousin, Devadatta, who thought that he was superior to the Buddha in every way, and his pride prevented any teachings from the Buddha from sinking in. He said, when you become prideful, he said, you become impervious to teaching and blessing, which I thought was really interesting. Anyhow, you guys have been wonderful. I've really enjoyed talking about these things with you today. I always learn so much in your presence, so thanks for bringing your genuine selves here. And because I missed the opening prayer, we'll just do the closing prayer. And we'll do this in English, thinking that we gather together all the goodness that we've put together in today's talk, and we will think of it as being dedicated to the liberation of all beings. It begins with the words, by this merit. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. The courageous Manjushri, who knows everything as it is, Samantabhadra, who also knows in the same way, and all the bodhisattvas, that I may follow in their path, I completely dedicate all this virtue. Okay, thanks everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Don. I appreciate it. And also, if folks would like to help, do we need to do anything this afternoon with the cushions, Julaine? Everything is good. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Om Mani Padme Hum.